Hi there, Spencer from e30 Steel. I thought I'd just make a very quick video just to explain exactly how the 5-stud e36 front suspension subframe fits with the s54 block and the s54 sump. So the reasons for the video is I keep getting asked, will this work with left-hand drive? So we actually make two subframes, one of them being the subframe to work with the original 4-stud e30 suspension and e30 M3 5-stud suspension, and this subframe, the one that we're looking at, this one works and designed to be working with the e36 5-stud suspension conversion. Now when we do the e36 5-stud suspension conversion, we actually use the e36 M3 Evo Euro lower arms, and we also use the e36 M3 Evo Euro spindles. Now you can buy any coilover shock absorber you'd like to run with that suspension setup, but you will have to buy an adjustable e30 top mount. Now the reason you have to buy an e30 adjustable top mount is because BMW moved the ball joint position on the lower strut of the e36 from where the e30 was to where the e36 lower outer ball joint is moved 50mm further forward. So what that does is that kicks the actual wheel back on the e36 strut. When you put the spindle on, it kicks the wheel back towards the wing 50mm. So what we do is we run the Evo arm, which attaches to the chassis, then the subframe, and then comes out. That arm has a less of an angle on it and allows the wheel to sit a little bit further forward. And then we run an offset lollipop bush in the backwards position to what it should be, and then that kicks the arm a little bit further forward. And then because we've moved the suspension strut around so much to get it in and get it in the center of the arch, we end up with too much caster angle. So what we do is we then adjust the top mount so the strut is in the more forward position and get the caster angle right. So in terms of doing all that, when that happens, if we were to leave the standard e30 cross member in the same position with the standard steering rack position, what you'd end up with is the Ackerman angle of the steering would be completely wrong upon turning the wheels. So given that fact, what we done was we measured the position of the steering rack on the e36 along with all the ball joints, and we figured out that the steering rack needs to come forward by a set amount. So we then moved the steering rack forward by a set amount on our subframe and done our crossbar, and as soon as we done that, all the rear load and sumps fitted straight in the e30 chassis, exactly the same setup as the e36 has got. So I'm now going to show you basically in the engine bay of the left-hand drive setup, and this is with the 5-stud e36 suspension subframe. Okay, so this suspension subframe bolts directly to the e30 chassis and uses the 5-stud suspension on the e30 chassis. Alright, so we're looking from obviously bird's eye view, passenger side, and what I wanted to show you was the clearance that we have through the sump, around the sump here to our engine bed. I would say it's probably just under an inch, 20mm, 20mm gap around the actual sump and subframe and bed. So I move around there. So this sump is unmodified. I'll just talk you through what we've got here. So we've got an M52 2.8 engine block, and then we've got the S54 oil pan. The engine block is exactly the same length and width as the S54, so on the stud patterns. So what that's allowed us to do is use the exact same engine mounts on the M52 engine as well as the S50, S54 and M50. And what that allows us to do is bolt the S54 oil pan directly to this block, just as a test to make sure that everything fits properly. So these are our custom made engine mounts, and then we have our custom made subframe on here. We also have a 5-speed e36 328i manual gearbox, and at the back of that gearbox, the mount that holds that to the car on the 5-speed is the standard e30 M20 manual gearbox mount. So the 320 325 manual gearbox mount that directly bolts to the e36 gearbox mounts and then directly bolts to the chassis without modification. So if you're running a 5-speed box on an S54 or an S50, you will have to run this S54 sump, an oil pump and tubes, for it to all fit perfectly without modification. If you want to run an S50 sump, you will have to modify the S50 sump, and that is just where it comes up and over the bed. It actually hits in that area. If you want to run an M52, it's exactly the same principle. The sump just hits in this area. We've designed this bed for the S54 sump because that sump is the best sump you can buy. It's a dual pickup oil pump, so we've got a scavenge pipe at the front and a secondary, the main oil pickup at the back. This back area is completely baffled in the sump, so you get no oil slosh whatsoever under cornering and braking. And if any oil does make its way forward under braking, you then end up with the scavenge pipe collecting oil on under braking, and then all the oil shoots back into the main oil pan, which is baffled, and you end up with a oil starvation under acceleration, under braking and cornering. Okay, so that's the best oil pan you can get for the job. If you're going to do one of these conversions, I strongly suggest fitting one of those, because you'll never blow the engine up. The engine will last forever. So we've designed our subframe kit. This is our engine mounts, our subframe in a left-hand drive with a purple tag steering rack. Now, all our subframes are designed to only work with a purple tag steering rack from an e36. This spline bar setup, as you can see, is 2 times e34 5 series UJs. So they're steering UJs off the e34 5 series. We manufacture this spline bar in-house, so this comes with a kit, and then the e34 UJs actually are exactly the same spline as the steering rack, this our spline bar, and the steering column. So the steering column that goes through into the car, that part is exactly the same spline as all of this on a left-hand drive. So on a right-hand drive, that spline is different. Now, if you're using our setup on a right-hand drive with a purple tag steering rack, I suggest you buy yourself one of these steering columns from Germany or America, and you can literally just unbolt this lower piece. There's a steel bracket there. You take that steel bracket off and you put the right-hand drive one on at the bottom, and then the whole steering column bolts into that side. So it's pretty straightforward. So the next thing to note basically is we have basically got the purple tag steering rack in there. The steering's fully connected. We have full clearance around the oil pan itself. So I'll just go down and just show you this. Full clearance around the steering rack, all the way around. And then we have clearance to the engine mounts for the steering rack and UJs. So another thing to note is the engine mounts that we use are a lot shorter than the factory items, and it takes all the movement out of the engine. So if I'm pulling on that engine, the engines are virtually solid, but you get no vibration through the car. So we've made sure that the engine mount rubbers still offer the dampening of the original ones, but they're a lot stiffer than the original ones, and the engine won't jump side to side. The reason we've done this because basically when you do these exhaust manifolds on the right-hand drive car, you end up with minimal space down there, and you don't want your engine jumping around and your exhaust manifold catching your steering. So the engine mounts are upgraded rubber mounts. The other thing to note is if you decide to buy one of our setups and the oil pan, your car has a left-hand drive and you're going to use this 5-stud setup, what that'll do, what you have to do, the only one mod you have to do to this oil pan, and this is very simple, we actually supply the parts now to modify this. It just literally means that you have to take your oil pan off, take it to an engineer who can drill the hole out. So you can see the dipstick hole is right in the way of the actual steering here. So we offer a blank with which actually utilizes the original rubber O-ring. So you can see that recess. You just have an engineering firm drill out this recess just in here, and then drill the center hole out just over here. and then we offer a blank which the original O-ring goes on, so you pop the blank in there, and then we offer a new bracket, steel bracket, which actually maintains the dipstick in that position and then also presses down onto this blank. So all you're doing effectively is moving the dipstick from this position to that position. And basically that means that the oil pan is unmodified, you know, and you don't have to weld anything. It literally is just a case of drilling a hole and bolting the little blank in on its O-ring. So that makes it very simple for left-hand drive purposes. I'm now going to just take you around to the other side of the car, just so you can see the setup. So again, these are our engine mounts on here, and these are obviously before paint not been primed, but you can see how they bolt to the block. Nice angles of everything. The engine sits in the centre of the car. So the main purpose for the video is just to explain the parts that we use in terms of the engine bed and what we have to do to the sump for the 5-stud setup. The other thing is what we do with this 5-stud setup is we sell weld-on brackets that comes in the kit. They basically sleeve over the chassis rail and extend this lump in the chassis. So if you can imagine this lump in the chassis on a convertible e30, this lump in the chassis actually is prolonged and actually comes to about here. That actual slope comes to about there and then comes along to the bottom there. So all we done was we mimicked that lump in the chassis for the anti-roll bar mount. So we now supply you with a lump that welds on here and then just curls up with 2 threads in. The anti-roll bar that we use is the Island Engineer and e30 M3 anti-roll bar setup. So you will have to buy the Island Engineer and e30 M3 anti-roll bar. That's from America. But we supply you with the mounts that you literally bolt to that kit, slip up onto the chassis, and then you just spot weld it all on. And you can seam weld it if you want, that's up to you. Spot welding's good enough. But I'm now going to just pause the video and take the car up and basically turn up on its side so you can see the setup from underneath. Everything sits central down the car. I'm just going to show you just in here. And the clearance we have around everything. Now the other thing I want to just mention is, unlike other people, every single part of our subframe is custom made and brand new. We don't actually reuse a single part from the original subframe. The original subframes, and the reason this is because there are many other people that are trying to weld thick tube, which is our cross tube is there. There's many other people trying to weld thick tube to the original pressed steel subframe. Now, the original pressed steel subframe is 1mm to 1.2mm thick, and to weld a 3mm tube to that can cause problems. Now, what we done in terms of that, because we didn't like the thought of having you know, a softer or a weaker material attached to our tubes, we actually went to the drawing board and actually redesigned the entire subframe. So everything now is pressed steel, 3mm minimum on each part. I believe the whole subframe is all 3mm, so it's double the thickness of what the factory item would have been. And all these ball joints, inner ball joint housings, everything is completely machined from scratch, including the bosses. Everything about this subframe is custom made, one-off. I'm now going to turn the car up and show you the underside. I'm pretty certain I haven't missed anything, but by all means, if you need to know anything else, you're more than welcome to message me, PM me. I'm now going to pause the video and turn the car up. So as you can see from the underneath, basically the reason for turning the car up is to show you that the s54 oil pan is basically fitting around our subframe, and we have clearance everywhere, so clearance all the way through. We have clearance literally around the entire steering rack. There isn't much, I mean there's a good 5mm under there, but it's still enough. The engine's not going to go any lower. And the reason for that is that we want to keep the center of gravity as low as possible. And as I look down the actual subframe, so coming along the subframe, you can see everything runs flat and level and true. So our subframe, this flat piece here, pardon me, is running flat and level with the lower part of the sump. So as you can see, if I come across like that, everything is all nice and tucked. Now you can actually get a slightly taller engine mount if you wanted to gain more height, but this level of the subframe, so the level of the subframe in the car itself, is actually the same height as the factory subframe that E30s had. We haven't changed the height of the subframe in the car. When people use the 5 Series sumps, they actually sit, the subframes sit nearly 2 inches, the oil pans sit nearly 2 inches past the bottom of the subframe. And that's why people have a problem with smashing their sumps on the floor. As you can see, with the S54 sump, it is very well tucked. So you never ever get any lash with anything on the floor. You're more likely to smash your engine bed or steering rack before you hit anything else. So again, I just wanted to show you around the actual clearance around everything. So just to give you some idea, I fit my finger straight through there. My finger must be 15-20 mil wide, especially exactly the same on turning. I've still got good clearance on turning. Fit my finger through there. As we go round, still get my finger through there. Still get my finger through there. So we've now gone to about 10 mil clearance, so we've got more than enough clearance on full turning all the way around on the steering from the subframe. Yeah, so you can see this is a 5-speed gearbox E36 that fits up with the standard E30 rear mount off an M20 325. We use the standard E30 rubbers as well, M20 325. If you use this gearbox, the M52 2.8 gearbox on the S54 engine, so this is the 5-speed gearbox, you can go ahead and use the E36 328 gear linkage. Will fit directly straight in here, total replacement for the standard E30 one. And then you can then run a complete E36 328 prop shaft, a manual one. All you have to do is change the center bearing for an E30 center bearing onto the E36 prop shaft, and then you've got your prop shaft connected to your diff. So with our engine mounts and our subframe, what we've effectively done is we've created a kit that allows you to use factory items on the E30 chassis without modification, so that you aren't using two halves of different props like a lot of people do, and then you end up with a prop shaft imbalance. So we like to make things so that they're just a direct fit, bolt on, bolt off. We don't like, if we can get away without making custom parts like prop shafts and gear linkages, we will, because it always costs too much money to replace them if they go wrong. So looking from the underside, you can see how structural this piece is. This is 3 mil plate, folded at a certain degrees down here to account for the angle of the engine mount. Box section, 3 mil wall box section. This tube is 3 mil. This boss is all brand new. All these bosses are machined. The engine bed comes with the dowels machined in them to go into the actual chassis. The video is getting a little bit long, so all I'm going to do is say, you know, there's a lot of information there. Hopefully that'll help you along the way with your build. I will just say lastly, the power steering lines, things like the power steering lines, you're going to have to make from scratch, okay? The original S54 or purple tag steering rack power steering lines won't work. But yeah, give us a message if you want any more information. By all means, message me, send me a PM. I can talk you through the whole process. If you buy a kit off us, I will guide you through the whole process of every part that we use, send you parts lists so that you can go ahead and just buy the parts and fit them up. Like I said before, we use parts from other BMW models that allow all this to be built just like a Lego set, rather than having to custom make everything. All right, thank you. I hope you enjoyed the video and got some information you may need. Take care. Thanks from E30 Steel.